My show is called Traces of a Social Movement, the Baltic Way, and it explores the 25th anniversary of a social movement that happened in the Baltic countries. In 1989, 2 million people held hands between the capitals of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, which is 630 kilometers long, and 2 million people is 25% of the population, came out and stood in that line holding hands together. They were sort of jammed, it was so many people. And they were protesting the agreement between the Soviets and the Germans to split Europe into spheres of influence, and this happened before World War II. At the end of World War II, the Soviets occupied the Baltics again. They had occupied them at the beginning, then Germany came in, then the Soviets came in, and they occupied them for it was almost 50 years by 1989. This was to celebrate and protest this piece of action that the Soviets had done, and the fact that they had been occupied illegally for 50 years. And it takes a lot of courage to go out and stand in a line when you know that the KGB is watching you and that your grandparents and maybe even your parents have been sent to Siberia if they protested or did anything wrong. Because about anywhere from 25 to 30% of the population had been sent to Siberia at some time during that 50-year period. And so last summer I went back and interviewed people who had stood in the line and asked them why they stood in the line, what their experience of standing in the line was like, what they thought it accomplished. And I met people who had helped organize it, and I interviewed them. And it's all through this web of connections that I'd made with former students from Lithuania that I've been back many times to teach. And then I drove the 630-kilometer route, and I took photographs along the route where they had stood, so I could see how things might have changed. So if you have a big shopping center here or a McDonald's. I mean, think about McDonald's did not exist. And so one of my favorite photos is there's a Freedom Monument in the middle of Riga, the capital of Latvia. And I stood back far enough that I could get the walk-through McDonald's because it's in an old part of the city where you can't have a drive-through, so they have a walk-through McDonald's. And so I call it my two Freedom Monuments, sort of this idea of freedom from the Soviets, but also this incursion of capitalism. And that's sort of what I was looking for. How do you put all these ironic pieces together into one image so that people notice and wonder, oh, that's a very interesting juxtaposition of ideas in one image. So it's both positive and negative at the same time. And not just one example of what I saw. Because they went through the countryside, they went through the little farming areas, they went through the center of these big cities. And so that's what all the photographs are. And then the portraits I have are created on a transfer method. So I take birch panels. They claim to be Baltic birch, which is sort of symbolic maybe. And then you put a formula on and you transfer the inks from a piece of plastic onto that panel. And I chose to do it without any marble powder in so that you could actually see the grain of the wood coming through their faces, sort of as a sign of the strength of these people who stood like a tree for freedom. And also I plan to put them up in a grid so that there are many, many, many people together. It's not about one individual. Because Americans like to think like in our freedom movements or whatever, there are singular people. Like if you think of the civil rights movement, you think of Martin Luther King Jr., right? Okay, so when I think of the Baltic Way, I don't think of an individual. I think of 2 million people, just average, ordinary people. And so I wanted to just show that visually by putting all of them together. And so that's a fun process. And it will go up here. It's already premiered in Latvia at the European Union House, and it appeared in Lithuania at the LCC International University, has been up in Chicago at the Lithuanian Museum for Culture, and now EMU. So that's basically what we're doing.